Hello, I'm Justin Wheeler, and welcome to this episode of Nonstop Nonprofit. Today, we're welcoming Brett Hagler, CEO and co-founder of Newstory. Brett has spent his career in both the startup world and the nonprofit sector, mixing the two to achieve success in both. And to that end, Brett is a vocal supporter of the 100% model of nonprofit funding that's used by Newstory, Charity Water, and other high-performing charitable organizations. But before we start the conversation, I'm going to give you a little context. About a month ago, in January of 2021, I put up a relatively controversial post on my LinkedIn page talking about the 100% model, the very topic that Brett and I will be discussing today. Specifically, I wrote, "This won't be popular, but the 100% model charities adopt is broken. At best, it makes a donor feel good about giving to you. At worst, it perpetuates the idea that overhead spend is bad. In reality, the reason why nonprofits that have adopted this model are growing fast is that they are spending more on overhead, not less." Now, I stand by that perspective today, just as I did when I hit publish. Having said that, I love open and productive discourse between passionate people. So when Brett and the team at Newstory, which is an awesome team by the way, responded to that post with some solid counterpoints and a suggestion that we bring this discussion here to the Nonstop Nonprofit podcast, I was all about it. Normally, this is where I'd sum up the episode in a sentence or two, but today I'm going to ask that you listen to my conversation with Brett as we discuss his take on the 100% funding model, and he shares why it's the foundation for Newstory's team, mission, and vision. Afterward, I'd love to hear your take on these ideas. Hit me up on my LinkedIn page or email me at justin@fundraise.org and let's talk. Now, let's dive into the episode. It is your number one priority to ensure that your business can continue to deliver on its mission, whether it's this year, next year, and beyond.
I'm always so baffled when I do webinars. There's always somebody at the end who raises their hand and says, "I'm the development director. Should I have access to the budget?" I'm always like, yes, you've got to know that.
The best thing that we can do is just raise as much money as possible and then give it to the people around the world.
If you're going to be sustainable, you have to have a multi-channel strategy to reach all of these different generations of donors however they want to be reached.
The best thing you can ever do as a nonprofit leader is spend as much money as possible on your story.
And it snowballs like any peer-to-peer campaign. The more people that view this content, the further and further it grows.
Then you're doing it wrong.
Okay.
That is unacceptable, and that is not the way to run a board.
The more nonprofits can give their donor base that experience of the impact that's being made on the ground level, there's nothing else that you have to give someone. This is Nonstop Nonprofit. All right, everyone. Hey, thank you for joining Nonstop Nonprofit. I'm so excited today to have the CEO and founder of Newstory, Brett Hagler, here on the show. Brett, thank you so much for joining the show.
Thanks, Justin. Great to be with y'all.
For those listening, we're going to be talking about the 100% model. A couple weeks ago, I made somewhat of a dramatic post talking about how I felt like it was broken, maybe too strong of words. Brett has built an amazing organization. They're growing at hyperspeed, and I want to talk to them about their strategy and how they've invested in growth to achieve the phenomenal results. Before we jump into that, Brett, tell me a little bit more about Newstory and what inspired you to get it started.
Sure. So Newstory, our mission is to pioneer solutions to end global homelessness. We work in now Haiti, El Salvador, and Mexico, and we're basically trying to create innovative ways to build housing at a lower cost for families that are living between $3 to, on the high end, $10 a day. So that's our demographic. And got started after a trip that I took to Haiti. I went down there a couple years after the 2010 earthquake and had no idea about the global housing problem and that over 1 billion people live in inadequate housing. And I was exposed to that problem. Problem itself broke my heart, but I had a for-profit startup at the time. And I didn't think about starting my own nonprofit. So I tried to go find other nonprofits that I could get really excited about. And for me, I was coming from more of like a Silicon Valley background, very tech-oriented, entrepreneurial. And the more I looked around, the more I just felt that the nonprofits I was considering were just very traditional, were very old school, and was just felt so different than the kinds of startups and teams and culture that I personally was excited about, which was back then like the Airbnbs of the world and, you know, those really exciting startups and and I just felt like such a disconnect. And I felt there was a lack of transparency, innovation, R&D, technology. I thought that, didn't pay enough, like all these things. And so the reason why I actually started News Story was twofold. It was one to, obviously help the families that we care deeply about, but two, it just felt like there needed to be literally a news story in how you build a nonprofit, and that's why it's called News Story. So until we got started, that was 2015. We were one of the first nonprofits to go through Y Combinator, which is a startup accelerator out of Silicon Valley that's produced Airbnb, DoorDash, Dropbox, a few other multi-billion-dollar startups. And, we went through the exact same program that all the for-profit companies went through. And the best part about it was they didn't treat us any differently because we were a nonprofit. And so that's always been in our DNA. And, since then, we've been able to raise now a little over $60 million, about over 3,000 houses. We ended up last year creating the world's first 3D printed community of homes in Mexico with our partner Icon. That was on an Apple documentary. And we now have about 30 team members. We're hiring a lot this year, and we're excited to scale up. And our goal is to house 1 million people is kind of our big milestone that we're marching towards. So I'll stop
amazing.
there and let you dive in, Justin.
Yeah, that's phenomenal growth. And I was going to actually jump in a little bit and talk about Y Combinator, and you did a great job explaining it. I love that you weren't treated any differently because, at the end of the day, a for-profit and nonprofit, the only difference is the tax code. Everything else should be really treated the same, especially if we're going to address hard problems. It's going to require talent of all levels. And so I love your background. I love that founding story. So what would you say over the next several years? What's your guys' goal? I mean, it's 1 million people housed. What sort of scale does that take to get to that level of impact?
Yeah, so we need to get to a little more than 200,000 homes. And so the key drivers for us is creating innovations and processes that can decrease the cost of housing per person. So if we can decrease the cost of housing per person, obviously you can fund more, but also families that are in our demographic, which are families in extreme poverty or coming out of extreme poverty, are in a better place to actually afford to pay for a high percentage of the total home cost, which is kind of our end goal, right? We don't want it to always be 100% philanthropy. We may have to subsidize a little bit through philanthropy, but the flywheel for us is use innovation, use more streamlined processes, more effectiveness and efficiencies through our partners to decrease the cost and improve the speed. And if we do that, then we make it more affordable for families. So that's kind of our flywheel. So we need to build about 200,000 units. And we also need to raise probably around $500 million. And so this year in 2021, we're trying to get past $20 million. And, the year after this will hopefully be past, or 2022 will hopefully be past 30, maybe closer to 35.
Wow.
So that's kind of just to give context of like some of our growth ambitions.
Yeah, that's awesome. What are the lead drivers of your guys' growth? I know 2019 was like you guys, I think, did 11 million, 11.9, or was it 12.9? One of the two. What did you guys do last year in terms of revenue?
So last year we did way less than we wanted to, mainly because of COVID, but also because we really wanted to do more things that we're investing into the future. So we ended up still having a growth year. It wasn't anywhere what we planned for before COVID, but we still had a growth year, and we really just wanted to kind of make investments into the future. So I would say it's a good year. It wasn't great. We're trying to make 2021 and 2022 pretty big years, where if we combine those 2 years, 2021 and 2022, ideally it's over 50 million total is what we're trying to get to.
Well, congrats. I mean, not many nonprofits can say they grew in the height of a pandemic. So congratulations to the team for that growth. I want to jump into the topic now and talk about, because you guys have an interesting funding model, which I think has obviously led to the growth you've experienced over the last 5 years in raising the $60 million plus. So talk to us about your approach to funding and why you decided to take the path that you've taken.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we've always had people refer to as the 100% model. There was really two reasons in the beginning to do it. The first thing was just to give donors an option and choice as to where they would like to allocate their funds, right? And so we started after our first communities we were funding were in Haiti, and it was after the earthquake. And I mean, there were horrendous stories in PR about the misuse of funds and mistrust in charities I mean, just terrible, terrible stories that definitely like repelled a lot of people in wanting to give there. Right. So we said, hey, well, the first thing we can easily do is at least promise that all of the money you're going to give to the homes in Haiti are going to go towards the direct labor costs and the material costs to build the houses. Right. And then we'll get another group to fund the overhead. And so that was like how it started, was from Haiti and from so many bad stories that we just didn't want that to be an issue of why people wouldn't fund it. And then the second reason was really that I wanted to be able to communicate to more so like investor types, or if anybody does any investing in funds, like limited partners that are really funding the future of the organization or of the business. Right. And how I communicate to those folks is exactly how I would communicate to a venture capitalist that I'm a startup and I'm growing. Right. I'm talking to them differently. I'm talking about our team. I'm talking about, R&D that we're going to do with, a risk. And I'm talking about all these investments into the future. And that's just a way different message than somebody that wants to get involved and wants to, fund a house for a marginalized family. And so to me, I just thought it was easier to split the communication and also split the option, right, for donors. And so I know we're going to get into how important OpEx is and overhead, but for us, it was just making it simple for people to choose. And then it also helped with just very clear communication as to which audience we were talking to and how we would talk to that audience.
Yeah, totally. And the scenario of treating sort of, I think you guys call them builders, right? This group of donors that funds the OpEx and overhead. So we're fundraisers as a venture-backed company. We raised about $25 million in venture capital. And so totally understand the language that's necessary and why investors invest in R&D and in OpEx for that future sort of growth potential. So in News Story's case, obviously, there's the bottom line for your builders isn't obviously this growth opportunity or this like liquidity event that's going to happen in 3 to 5 years. It's the promise of impact. So how do you communicate? How do you tie impact into that investor language where it still gets people excited, thinking about high growth with a different sort of outcome?
Yeah, for sure. So we have, just for context, we have a private group of donors that we call the builders, and it's a little more than 50 individuals or families right now. They all commit to 3-year commitments and it's a minimum of $50,000 a year to join. Right now, the average is closer to $100,000 a year to join. So that is just absolutely amazing from a planning perspective. And all of that money goes towards our operational expenses and is unrestricted, right? And so that's just a little bit of how we've set it up. Now, when I'm pitching builders and we're doing our reports, we're really measuring, of course, the number of lives that we're impacting in the homes that we're building, but we're also talking about, future investments that we're making to have more outsized impact, right? So for example, getting into 3D printed houses with our partner Icon, we were able to do that early and to move quickly on it because we had a pool of unrestricted capital from forward-thinking, innovative minds that want us to take calculated risk, right? That's way different than, my mom's friend that is going to give $1,000 and she just wants to help another mom get into a house, right? Yeah. It's like, it's just way different than saying, oh, hey, by the way, like you should help this mom getting into a house. And, it's important that for overhead and for R&D, and we're trying to create a 3D printing machine that's probably not going to work. And like, you should fund that too. And so we split it out, and the builders, which funds all our overhead and operational expenses in our R&D, they're seeing both the short-term benefits, which is the number of families we get to impact, and we're talking about our investments that we're making for the future. So some years, for example, if we're building a new software product that is going to have to do with repayments for the families that move into our homes, and we want to track the loans, and we want them to actually just do repayments through software in a system that we've built, right? Well, I can go out and communicate to them and say, hey, well, in 2021, it's going to freaking cost $500,000 to bring on 3 or 4 engineers to build this. And so our ratio, or whatever you want to look at, may be skewed this year, but should I not invest into these software engineers for building a system for years to come because it's going to mess up the ratio? That just doesn't make sense, because you're investing for the future, right? You're saying if we get this done, then we believe that, years from now, it's going to have an outsized impact, and it's going to be at minimum 10 times more of how many people you can impact. So
Yeah.
it's I guess to summarize, it's communicating the short-term direct impact, but also the investments that you're making into the future. And to make investments, it usually comes through team or some type of, R&D or innovation project that you need money to put into it.
Yeah, makes total sense. On the financial ratio piece, with your budget split, do you find yourself still needing to or wanting to or caring to pay attention to sort of, because I mean, there could be a scenario where you raise a bunch more from private donor, from builders, than maybe you do from the public in one year. So how do you look at the financial ratios? Do you think it's obsolete? Do you think it's important to understand? What's your thoughts there?
I get why people care a lot about it, because if you're working with a team that maybe doesn't have the competence to do some big things in the future, I could see how it's mismanaged, right?
Yeah.
But if you're working with a really talented, competent team, sometimes there are going to be years where you're going to be more heavy on the overhead or OpEx for reasons that I talked about, right? It could be, hey, we have a 3-year plan, and let's say in 3 years, let's just say on a revenue side, right? In 3 years, we want to get to $30 million a year in revenue, right? Well, what investment do you have to make this year to make that happen? That could be hiring 10 new people, where those numbers aren't going to show up for another 2 years, right? So it's like, do you not invest in hiring the 10 people because you don't want your, perfect ratio to be messed up? And I just think too many leaders, they don't make the bets and the investments that they need to take because they're too short-sighted in the ratios. And as long as the way I would say is, like, the most important thing is, as long as you can explain why the numbers or why the ratio is what it is, then, like, you have to be able to explain it, right?
Yeah.
So for us, some years it's going to be way leaner, right? So we're spending a total of, call it $20 million. Sometimes, almost 16 million or 15 million of that is going to go towards building houses, right? Some years it could be closer to half and half. It just depends what you're working on and your strategy. That's why we love giving people the option, right? We love just saying, hey, if you care deeply about directly helping a family get into a new house, like, we have a fund that is totally restricted, and that money will be used to do that, right?
Yeah.
And we can do it with, high integrity, with efficiency, and we'll show you the family. Then we have the option on the other side.
Yeah.
So that's how we think about it. We've never put out, like, certain ratios or percentages, just because I think once you start doing that, like, you're always going to want to try to make it go in a certain direction, right? You're always going to try to be like, oh, we're going to be more, lean or efficient this way. And again, what that does is it makes you stop thinking about investments and big bets and R&D, because that stuff costs money. And if that stuff costs money and it's not directly related to that specific outcome or that specific percentage, you're not going to be incentivized to do it.
Yep. 100%. I love that. Looking at sort of the OpEx at a year at a time really doesn't make that much sense. When you're trying to end a huge problem, it's going to be a multi-year, obviously, strategy. And as you mentioned, some years it's going to be a lot more expensive than others. And, from a donor perspective, a new donor coming in, they see an organization spending 50% on operations. That's going to send all sort of, red flags to that donor. And the question I have is, how do we remove that, right? How do we get the donor to start digging more and saying, well, why are you spending, 50% this year? How do we move donors into asking better questions? Because what I've seen and have experienced, a lot of times donors, they look at that sort of ratio, they look at that number, or organizations are forced to, like, oh, I think this R&D is actually more related to programs. So we're gonna bury this under, this program expense, and then forces organizations not to be as transparent as they could be or should be. And it sounds like, News Story's approach is, we're just going to separate it. The donors that want to fund OpEx, we're going to put them in that bucket. Donors who don't, we're going to go here. And that's how we're going to deal with it. Do you think there's a way to have a broader conversation to get more donors thinking the way your builders are thinking, regardless of the size of gift that they give? Or do you think that there's just different donors?
Yeah, just to be really transparent, I think it totally depends who your donor demographic is, right? And I'm not going to go into specific examples of that, but I think we could all probably think of, okay, there's a certain donor type that, if they're giving, call it, small monthly donations, or even if it's a couple $1,000s or $10,000 a year. Like, there are certain types that would understand the strategy you have of, hey, maybe we're going to invest more in team this year, or in this R&D project, or whatever it might be. I think it's a pretty small demographic, and you got to be really dialed into it. Actually, that is part of News Story's demographic, just kind of where we come from like the startup and VC world. But if not, I think it just confuses people. You could try to go out there and sell it, but I personally think that it's easier to split things out. That's just from my experience. There's many different ways to do it, because the last thing we're trying to do is, we're not trying to hide anything, right? Like, I like literally some of our biggest donors, all they're doing is funding our overhead, and all I'm talking to them about is our team and new things we want to try. And so it's not trying to hide it; it's just giving people an option. Yeah. So I don't know. It's tricky. I mean,
I think there's a lot of transparency, especially looking at sort of the way you guys break it out. It's super transparent. I don't think that's an issue. I think for organizations who can't operate, and maybe they just need to be more innovative and figure out a way to find the right types of donors. But I think what you see with some organizations who can't operate like that, who can't say 100% of their donation goes to their programs, feel like they're less competitive. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe the nonprofit community needs more competition. Maybe the nonprofit community needs, more innovation to drive organizations to think bigger and better. Maybe that's part of it. You hear often from probably smaller organizations, sub 5 million, that they feel it's a disadvantage because it's just something that they don't have the resources maybe to pull off, which kind of takes me to the next question. Or do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I don't know. My gut from, I've been in this now for almost 6 years. And so I'm not trying to speak for other folks. From my perspective, I think that whether your percentage is, 100 or 90 or 80, like, as long as you have a compelling story and you're being really smart about why it is what it is, I don't know. I don't think there's going to be some people that may be hesitant, but I think at large, the majority of people, if you're doing all the other things right, I doubt that they're going to be like, oh, screw these guys. It's 70%. Like, if you can clearly communicate what the other is for. And also, it's like just being smart. It's like, sometimes don't advertise your exact percentage like as clearly as possible, right? Like, you don't want to hide anything, right? But it doesn't have to be on your the top of your homepage.
Yeah, it requires that data point requires more context. It requires more conversation, right? It's not a leading indicator. So yeah, I agree with that.
And it's all about how you frame it too, right? And I think a lot of orgs can do better at this, right? You can frame that hiring excellent people and getting great people into the social impact space is the most strategic thing you can do.
Yeah.
Right. Like, that is the most strategic thing you can do, is get excellent people on your team. Yeah. Right. So when I'm always talking about that, even to our folks that fund houses, I'm like, if we want to really impact like people at scale, I have to build one of the best social impact teams in the world. Right. And you talk about it where it's not like, you don't shy away from hiring great people or paying people well. It's like, no, you go all in and you say like, this is it, right? Like, this is the foundation that everything else will be built on. And if we can't have excellent people, and if I can't recruit from great places, then like you're just going to get linear impact and you're going to get mediocrity. Yeah. Right. That's what you're going to get. And so that's up to you as to how you communicate things.
In the beginning, you talked about efficiency, and most organizations would think of efficiency like, where can we lean out on OpEx? But what you were looking at is, how do we drive down the cost per home, right? Like, how do we increase our gross margin essentially on the product that we're building? That approach is super interesting. It's not like, how do we cut like 6 people so that our margins are better? It's the impact that we're making, how do we make it cheaper to make?
Exactly.
So I love that concept.
The other thing, I mean, also obviously depends on your impact strategy, right? So for us, like, if we're going to build software, it's going to be something that, is obviously going to have an impact for the direct work that we do. But our strategy is also to democratize that and to share it with other nonprofits so that they can use it for their housing needs, right? Yeah. So from that perspective, if I'm pitching it to somebody and I'm saying, okay, well, this year we're going to spend an extra $500,000 on engineering. It's going to directly impact our work. And, 3 years from now, we envision 100 other organizations using this software, which then you could say is going to impact about X amount of people. So it depends on your impact strategy. But for us, it's been awesome to have that approach.
Yeah, awesome. Two more questions from my end. So, has this funding strategy ever impacted your growth, do you think, and negatively? Like, have you ever felt like this is maybe more relevant in the early days of getting it started, but did you ever feel like you actually grew slower because you didn't have enough OpEx funding?
Yeah, I mean, I think, what we're trying to figure out right now, I mean, yes, I think if you you're usually limited by your OpEx usually is the driver of how much impact you can have and how much revenue you can bring in and what you're setting up your investment for the future, right? So if we would have had an extra $5 million, 2 years ago, I definitely think we would have had more impact and we would have been in a better place today. For us long term, we are trying to work this year. Hasn't really started yet, but we're gonna go pretty big on a monthly subscription program. It's called The Neighborhood. And so our goal is to first, start getting, as many subscribers as we can. First big milestone is 10,000 monthly subscribers, and then eventually get to 100,000. And, at some point, I think it's interesting to give people an option then, once you're at a pretty big scale, if they want to give a percentage of their monthly donation towards our operations. If, we can prove to them that, hey, if you give, 20% or half, well, we can prove that we're going to go get X amount of more monthly subscribers, which is going to then create X amount of more impact.
That's awesome.
And so that's more in the future.
Yeah.
But that like right now, because we're pretty reliant, which is fine, it's working for us, is our builder group. But I think long term, we're going to try to have another way to bring in the operational funding.
Yeah, that makes sense. I asked that question. I remember Scott from Charity Water shared a story where they almost shut their doors because they had millions in the bank for water projects, but almost $0 for
I see.
their overhead. And so that story is initially what got me thinking about, well, how effective is this 100% model, right? How common is that sort of scenario for organizations who are adopting a 100% model? When I was at Liberty in North Korea, another organization that I had helped start, we adopted the 100% model as well and moved a lot of our, had the same sort of like demographic of donors, like Silicon Valley, entrepreneurs, things like that were actually funding our operations. And there were times when it was like, we knew we needed more people on the team to accomplish the goals we had over the next, 3 to 5 years, but we were stuck because we couldn't tap into. We had all this restricted funding for refugee rescues, and we couldn't touch it. And our board would often get so like pissed off. They're like, "Why did we ever adopt this model? Like, we need to grow, we can't."
Yeah.
But again, your innovation going back to thinking about, well, how do we create more sources of overhead funding through donors who are now duly connected to the mission, right? Like providing houses, but also growing the overall revenue. I love that.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's not having it split out. It's definitely not for everybody, but if you do it, I think, creating some type of program that people can commit to for multi-years, it's just awesome. Right. Like we have it with the Builders program. Charity Water has it with the Well, and I'm sure there's other good examples. It's just the ones I'm most familiar with. It's so great to know as, a CEO over the next couple of years, I have this amount of money coming in for operational expenses, right? At minimum, if we don't raise any more money, like this is at minimum what we have coming in, and we can plan against that. Like we can do everything against that. Yeah. And when you're getting those type of people committed to your long-term mission and to your team and to like what it takes to build an excellent organization, they are also very well connected. And a lot of our big partnerships on the home building side has come through this private group of donors, right? Because they know the CEO or the CMO at this company, or, it just, all these things start happening because you've created a unique group of people that you're communicating to in a very different way, right? It's about the future. It's about the vision. It's about being part of building something truly great and getting people to understand that. I would argue the best way that most people could help, well, a certain percentage of people, is by funding the team and by funding the future.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's when at Liberty North Korea, the way I like that is you could fund a single rescue as $3,000 to fund one rescue, or you could take that $3,000 and likely multiply it through some of our other fundraising strategies, right? Turn that 3,000 into 12,000 or whatever it might be. And, to your point, not every donor has that mindset. Not every donor looks at their giving as a philanthropy or as a venture investment that can be multiplied. So Makes total sense. So Brett, I totally appreciate this conversation. News Story has been great to interact with. We had Sarah on the podcast a while back. And so as a small token of my appreciation, I'm going to go and subscribe to your guys' monthly giving program.
Oh, cool.
For those listening, how can they do that? How can they do the same? Like, where can people go to make a contribution or become a monthly subscriber?
Yeah, so just you go to a website, newstorycharity.org. We are, in about 2 months, we're going to start making a really big push for we're calling it the neighborhood. So, sign up to be a good neighbor, love your neighbor. And every month you can help a family that, is living in inadequate housing, and you could change it every month. So just on our website, it'll be there front center.
Awesome. Brett, thanks for your time. Thanks for being an
Justin.
innovative leader in the nonprofit space. Really appreciate it. And good luck with your ambitious goals in the years to come.
Thanks. And for anybody listening, if you're looking for new nonprofit career opportunities, we're hiring a lot this year.
Hiring tons. All right. When we post this up, we'll post that as well. Hopefully drive some traffic to your guys' site.
Cool.
Awesome. Thanks, Brett.
Thanks, man. Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks for listening to this episode of Nonstop Nonprofit. This podcast is brought to you by your friends at Fundraise, nonprofit fundraising software built by nonprofit people. If you'd like to continue the conversation, find me on LinkedIn or text me at 562-242-8160. And don't forget to get your next episode the second it hits the internets. Go to nonstopnonprofitpodcast.com and sign up for email notifications today. See you next time.